Hello everyone, my name is Francesco Cipollone, or Frank for Friend. Today I want to talk to you about a couple of new exciting features that we have recently published and with Phoenix Security, and walk you through a quick demo of the reachability analysis we have introduced from code to cloud, and consequently the contextual deduplication of your repository into your container, together with what we call contextual attribution and traceability of your application into the cloud. So we prepared a small video, and without further ado, let's jump into the demo. So yeah, we prepared a little bit of a small overview of what we have. So assume that you have a build file that is fundamentally a collection of library in your CI/CD or from your SNCC or from your favorite. In this particular case, you have 4 vulnerabilities that are CVSS 8 and 6 prioritize, and then Phoenix Security will reprioritize those vulnerabilities. Now, those vulnerabilities are associated to a particular team and a particular application or bucket of those library that is called finance backend. And this finance backend is, of course, built inside a runtime environment that is called web app container that has a bunch of artifacts built either in this particular case in a CI/CD perspective with build file and then deployed in the cloud, or you can have those built from an image in your registry. Let's assume you have scan with your favorite tool like Aqua from a CI/CD, your container scans, or you have your favorite scanning tool into the cloud, and you identify a bunch of vulnerability. Now, those vulnerability and some of these libraries are being built fundamentally from this file to this container, because that's how containers are being created. Now, if you scan those things individually, you'll have a bunch of vulnerabilities here, and then a bunch of vulnerabilities here, and those are fundamentally the same. And then for each version of the container, you are publish it 3.1, 3.2, 3.3, and so on. You're going to have the same amount of vulnerability. So in total, you have tons of vulnerability. So what we did with Phoenix is, why don't we detect dynamically which vulnerability and which profile of build file match which container, in this particular case those container, and then let's discover the vulnerability that are detected. So in this particular case, as I mentioned, we have the finance backend that is deployed on the web app container, and this particular finance backend has a bunch of library and a bunch of vulnerability. We're not going to focus on all of them, but we're going to focus just on the one that are actually linked together with those particular set of container and more that I've highlighted before. Now, in this particular case, those library that were originally, or those findings that were originally identified, let's say this one that was originally identified as a CVSS 6 from the scanner, because it's a common library and it has a particular vulnerability. It is exploited in the wild. We can see more detail about the particular vulnerability later on. But then we need to detect, hey, is this particular vulnerability being loaded in memory? If yes, in particular, what is the effect in runtime? And then how much we can bump up the risk level of this vulnerability. But also, if you're a developer, you'd want to look at where can I actually fix. And if we go back here, these particular container are being created by a container file that then spin up those particular container. Now, if you're a developer, you wouldn't be able to touch those individually, but you'll bump the library not in the container, but in the file that then is contained inside the container. And hence, this is where we highlight with Phoenix Security the vulnerability that are identified in the cloud, and then suggest fundamentally to fix them and raise fundamentally the vulnerability risk level, because those particular vulnerability are loaded in memory in a number of containers. So this is the first instance and element that I wanted to bring up and showcase, that is called contextual deduplication. Now, the other example where we started working towards and together is, fundamentally, you have a lot of these parent association, and sometimes you have a very well-defined relationship between the business that, the software that you build and where it is running. And you have identified them with tagging system, with deployment concept, and so on. But sometimes you don't know. Like in these two particular cases, you might have some matches of this particular app that are deployed in this set of container. Now, what we've done with Phoenix is using the same concept of profiling, basically the build file here and the container file, and saying, are those two fairly similar in terms of vulnerability libraries and version, timeline, and we have several data points in our AI engine that fundamentally create a match together. Are those fairly similar? If yes, maybe you have this deployment relationship as we identify in what we call the contextual discovery, and you have these particular lines or this particular application that could be related to this set of container running in a particular environment. So in this particular case, into Phoenix, you have this well-defined relationship, but then for this particular web app container application, you might have two other instances of the same kind of library and build file that then match fundamentally the container file or some of the container files that are contained inside that particular application. In this particular case, this one that is contained in the web app cluster, and as you can see, those one are actually contained in one of these. Now we have some of the relationships that are well defined and some of the relationships that are discovered. So with what we call the contextual discovery, we suggest fundamentally the pair of the application and the cluster of container or group of software where this particular application is being deployed into. And this is what we call contextual deduplication and contextual discovery. So to recap, fundamentally, Phoenix have published two major features. The first one is the contextual deduplication, and the second one is the cloud to contextual discovery. And the way it works is to, first of all, correlate things together in a scenario where you scan different things, different stage of the pipeline. With your SCA, with your SAS scanner, and you identify a particular library that getting built inside a container, and then this container get deployed in your environment, you scan your environment or you scan your container at this particular, in this particular instance, and you get a number of vulnerabilities either here or in runtime. The same vulnerability are appearing in two elements, and so fundamentally with Phoenix what we do is we call this live and pre-live, and we dynamically ignore the things, we dynamically punch you out to the SCA or to the library where you can actually fix the vulnerability versus the one where you can't fix in the container side, because fundamentally those libraries are detected in a particular instance. And this can reduce significantly the number of vulnerabilities that you have and that you have to deal with from a development perspective. So in this particular case, you will have 47 versus in particular case with Phoenix, you will have 3 to look at instead of 47. And then if you multiply that for every application that you have and for every container element that you have, this number can balloon and can explode quite significantly. So this enables you to basically cut in half the number of vulnerabilities that you have to look at. And at the same time, this contextual deployment enables you to visualize and identify which application is being deployed on which environment if we find a good correlation. And we also explain you how much and how strong that correlation is. And with one click, you can fundamentally link those two elements together to actually enable the contextual deduplication. So I hope this was useful. Francesco Cipollone here. This is Phoenix Security, your partner in preventing burnout and removing vulnerability. Stay safe out there. Goodbye.